Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of my tutorial on rigging the gyrocopter. This time, as promised, we're going to be looking into rigging the hoses using Spline IK. Before I get into that though, I have a couple of notes from the previous tutorial that I wanted to share. The first of which concerns the difference between world space and local space. You may remember me trying to explain it to you last time. Right here in the constraints, world and space, I rotated the whole thing to try to show you, but since I rotated along the x-axis, you couldn't really tell the difference. However, if I turn the whole thing, including the empties, so that it doesn't make a mess, if I rotate the whole thing, for example, around the z-axis, immediately you'll notice that there's something wrong with the main control bone right here. And in fact, if I go into pose mode and rotate it to bring the landing gear down, you'll see that the front wheel is actually pretty crazy as well. The reason for that is, while I was demonstrating it to you last time, I switched it from local space to world space and forgot to switch it back, which was really smart on my part. So all I have to do is bring it back to local space, right here. And it's still not perfect, because we have to fix the problem right here, which is exactly the same. We have it evaluating the limits of the rotation on the world space and not on local space. So right now it is limiting the rotation to the x-axis, but on the global x-axis, which makes it sit on the basically on the grid. And that's not what we want. We want it to limit the rotation on the x-axis, sure, but on its own local space, so that whatever the rotation the whole thing has, and that it will follow, when I try to rotate this bone, it will only ever rotate along its own x-axis, and that's exactly what we want. Okay, with that out of the way, and to save some time, instead of trying to clear the rotations, I'll just go Control Z until it goes back to normal, because I'm sure that something weird would happen with objects flying around. So this way I'll just save space, save time for the tutorial by just going back and fixing these things by hand. Okay, the second note I had was concerning envelope deformations. You may remember me thinking I had found a bug, because even though I had turned off envelope deformations on the armature, I was still getting weird deformations from it. And I actually went ahead to each of the bones and turned off these settings for envelope deformations. Well, I talked to Joshua Allegorith on IRC, and he cleared it up for me. Basically, I have to turn off envelope deformations also on the armature modifier. So I have to go to the meshes that are affected by the armature and switch off bone envelopes, and that will do it. Right now you won't tell the difference between each, because, like I said, I had turned it off for every single bone, but I really didn't have to. All it took was to turn this off. Okay, so now we're ready to get on to Spline IK. And Spline IK is something pretty interesting to figure out. The way it works, and actually the only thing it does, Spline IK, is to align a chain of bones onto a curve. That's all it does, nothing else. Pretty much like limiting rotation, only limits rotation. It doesn't do any other magic. Spline IK, all it does is to align a chain of bones to a curve, and I'm going to show you how. The first thing we need is a curve. Well, right now we already have it, since these hoses are actually curves and not meshes yet. We're going to use that to our advantage. So I'm going to select just this top hose right here, and clicking L to select all the control points. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate it, right click to keep it in the same place, and hit P to separate it. So right now, if I tab out of edit mode, we have these hoses right here and the curve that we just duplicated. Now this curve, I don't want it to have any depth like the hoses have, so I'll bring depth to 0, and to make sure I see it better without having to go into wireframe mode, I'll just turn on X-ray. I'll go ahead and name it as well, by the way. I'll name it curve top hose. There we go. And as you can see, it's visible even without wireframe view. Don't worry about that back there. It's actually the mirror modifier working. Okay, now to avoid any accidents though when I deform these, I'm going to separate the hoses as well. So going into edit mode, I'll select this hose and hit P to separate. So right now we only have this one hose to later assign to the armature. And in this tutorial, for the sake of time and to try to keep the quality pretty high so you can see things clearly, I'll have to do this really quickly, and the process is exactly the same if you wanted to rig the other hoses as well. So I'll just do this top hose right here. Okay, so we've got a curve, we've got a hose that actually we don't have it yet. We have a curve pretending to be a hose, so to speak. We want to make it a mesh so that we can later deform it. So what we're going to do before that is to actually increase the resolution, because you'll see right now it is pretty blocky. Well, one of the reasons for that is that we have simplify turned on, so no subdivisions. But since I want to keep that on, simplify I mean, and I still want to have some nice deformations on the viewport, I'm going to bring the resolution up a bit, maybe up to 8. That should be good. And now I can go ahead and hit Alt-C to convert Alt-C, I mean, to convert the curve to a mesh. And there we go, ready to be deformed. Now the next thing we need are bones. Now the first thing you would think would be to go into the armature that we already have and add bones to it. But as a matter of fact, and for reasons that I will explain later because it will be easier to explain by then, we actually need a different armature for this. So I'm going to go ahead and position my cursor right here. Yep, it's centered, so position it right there. Hit Shift-A to add an armature, a new one, and a single bone right there. First of all, I'm going to name this armature to armature hose. There we go. I can go ahead and name the other one armature main. There we go. Now with this one, I'll tab into edit mode and bring that tail down there. Whoops. There we go. And the position doesn't really matter since we'll later redefine it by applying it to the curve. But just to make it clear what I'm doing, I'll just extrude along the y-axis a few times like that. And selecting the whole thing, I'll hit W to subdivide to quickly get me a bunch more. And now it's time to apply the IK constraint, the Spline IK constraint, better said. So to do that, we go into edit mode, actually pose mode, sorry, with Control Tab. Select the tip of the chain, add a constraint, Spline IK, and target it to the curve that we'd created. Now, let me hit X-ray first. You'll see that the bone is right there already applied, but it's kind of squished. I want it not to use the curve radius. I want it to keep that form, so to speak, that volume. And you'll notice that it's the other way around. The reason for that is that the curve needs to be the other way around, the direction basically. So I'm going to try to select the curve, which is never easy. There we go. Hit Tab to go into edit mode, hit W, and switch direction. So right now the bone, the tip of the bone is right here where I want it. So going back to the chain, to the bone with a constraint, and this is where the IK comes in, I'm going to increase the chain length so that the constraint actually affects the whole chain all the way back to the base. So by increasing this number, you'll see the bones getting into place, and there we go. 10 gives us all the bones, puts all the bones in position. Okay, so we've got our bones in place. And now the reason I told you earlier that we needed another armature is this. Right now, the bones are getting their position from the curve. That's what Spline IK does. When we want to deform the curve, though, we can't tell it to use bones in the same armature, because basically this that would give us a cyclic dependency. The bone gets its position from the curve, and the bone gets its position from the curve, and the curve would be getting its position from the bone as well, from the armature, and that can't be that can't do right. I mean, it will do crazy stuff. So the solution to that is to actually have two armatures, one for the hose and another to control that. And for the control hose, for the control bones, we can actually use the armature we already had in place. So we're gonna have to add control bones to this. But before I do that, let me just, if you see, if I go into edit mode, the bones go back to down here, which is not what I want. I want it to be up here in the rest position. So I'm going to select all of them, go into pose, and apply the pose as the rest pose. So now when I go into edit mode, they're right there. Okay, so it's time to add the control bones to this. And the way you do it, if you think about it, the control bones will basically have effect on the curve. And the curve has control points. So if I were to grab these control points around, that would be basically the essential of picking a mesh and dragging the vertices around, and that would deform. Now we want the deformations to be based on bones to make this a little bit more user-friendly to the animator. So what we're going to do is to add control bones for each control point in the curve. Or actually, we're going to cheat a little bit. In this case, you'll see that we have one control point right here, another one right there, another one right there, and two more back there. We're not going to worry about those two for the sakes of this tutorial. We'll just be adding 3 bones to control these control points here. And the way we do that is using hooks. But before we get into that, let's just position and add 3 more bones right here. So I'll select this control point, hit Shift S, cursor to selected, tab out of edit mode, select the armature. Let me just make it octahedral again so that we can see it better, and X-ray, and tab into edit mode, and Shift A to add another bone to this armature. Let's make it a little bit smaller, quite a bit smaller in fact. Like that. There we go. Tab out of edit mode, select the curve somehow. There we go. Tab into edit mode, select the control point. Shift S, cursor to selected. Tab out of edit mode, select the armature right here. Tab into edit mode, Shift A to add another bone at the cursor. Make it a whole lot smaller. There we go. Tab out of edit mode, reselect the curve. No, there we go. Select this control bone, I believe. Yep, control point again. Shift S, cursor to selected, tab out of edit mode, select the armature, tab into edit mode, Shift A, and make it a whole lot smaller. Okay, so after that batch of repetitive work, we've got 3 bones in place. Let's go ahead and name them. I'll be consistent with the direction of the curve, so I'll call this bone bone 1, this one bone 2, or actually hose bone 2. There we go. Hose bone 1 and hose bone 3. There we go. Okay, now what we do is add the hooks I was talking about. Basically the hooks, just imagine an actual hook, fishing hook, and sticking it right here. When you pull the hook, the hose will follow. That's what we'll do. We'll select the mesh, which is actually already selected, then do the tricky thing of selecting the curve. Nope. There we go. shift selecting the curve, so shift right click, tab to go into edit mode on the curve, and selecting this control point right here, hit Control H to add a hook to the selected object, the first selected object, as you can read there, which happens to be the armature. So it'll hook it to the armature. The same over here, select that control point, Control H, hook to selected object, and this one, Control H, hook to selected object. Now if you go into the modifiers, you'll see that we have all the hook modifiers set up right here. The first one was this one up here, so we will target it to the hose bone 1. This one was the second one, so we'll target the hose bone 2 and hose bone 3. Now if I tabbed out of edit mode, you'll see the curve doing some crazy stuff there. That's because after you assign the targets, you have to go ahead and hit reset for all these to work nicely. So reset all the hooks, so now the curve stays well in place. After we've done that, if we get to the armature and go into pose mode, something awesome happens. So I'll grab this bone and those will follow. There we go. Exactly what we want. Now all that's left is actually to there we go, is to actually make the hose deform according to these bones, because as you can see, the bones are actually being pulled around by the control bones. I mean, the armature, this armature here, is following the curve, so which is following the control bones. So all we have to do is to make this mesh be deformed by the chain of bones over here. And the way to do that, as usual, is to select the mesh, shift select the armature, hit Control P, and this time we'll go with automatic weights, which should work fine. So if we now select this armature for the control bones, select this bone and grab it, ta-da! The hose is deforming as we want it to. And that's it. So let me just turn off X-ray on these bones so that we have a more clear view, and actually on the curve as well. There we go. Curve X-ray off. And maybe bring this down to there. You can see that I can now manipulate the hose as I want it. Say bringing this down here, bringing this over here, rotating this to fit. There we go. And just fix it to better fit the motion. And obviously I'm not doing a great job at it, but you can see how one would go about doing it. And that's it. That's Spline IK. Obviously, this will require a bit more work. In the previous part, I did my best to make all the bones respond to the single control bone right here. And to actually do the same with the hoses would require a lot of effort, probably some Python scripting to make these bones follow some specific rules of deformation, of stretching, and following a correct motion to stay connected down here. Who knows, maybe I'll do a part 3 of this sometime later, not immediately, on automating all of that. But right now you'll get at least the impression of how Spline IK works, what it's useful for, and actually play around with it, because it's actually pretty fun. Oh yeah, one last thing. I made the armature stretch along with the curve. So basically the hoses are stretching. They're not maintaining their original volume. In this situation it works. The hoses for these kind of pistons are usually completely black or something, so it doesn't really matter. But if you have a textured hose, say a braided hose of sorts, the stretching will make it look awful. Just clearly said. Um, it is more tricky to solve that, I imagine. But in this case, it's not really a problem that the whole thing is stretching. Okay, so that was it. I'll leave it as an exercise to the viewer to actually rig the rest of the hoses if you have the gyrocopter to actually make them fit here nicely. And good luck. If you have any questions, go ahead and comment either on the video or on the blog post about this. And have fun, because this really is a lot of fun. Goodbye.